clerk will please read the next measure.
Senate Bill 1548 relating to standards of time.
Recognize Senator Thatcher.
Good morning, colleagues. It is still technically morning. And just for a little bit of background, some of you were here 5 years ago when we brought forward a bill that would say we're going to remain on daylight saving time. We worked with Washington. California's people had passed it overwhelmingly. We said we're going to be a block of states. We are going to apply to the U.S. Department of Transportation as a block of states to say we are going to just remain on daylight saving time all year long. We've made that application, and at the same time in 2019, there was momentum within Congress to move to allow states to remain on permanent daylight saving time. However, the momentum has stopped and actually reversed, given evidence that indicates that standard time is the better choice if you want to ditch the switch. So here we are today, talking about remaining on standard time. And guess what? We don't have to ask the federal government for permission. We can finally, as a state, make the decision to ditch the switch. If and when the federal government ever decides to entertain daylight saving time again, we can look back at that and reconsider. But for now, we have that ability, we have that power to step out on this issue. I've been working with legislators in Idaho, Washington, and California. We talked about whether we should depend on one another to change, like if you move, I'll move, if you move, we'll move. No. We decided we would go at our own pace, and right now we are leading on this issue. We are stepping out, which does create some interesting things, but I believe they will be temporary. 3/4 of the folks that have written to me, and I thought it was actually evenly divided, but upon further examination, 3/4 of the folks who have written to me in my email have support this change to standard time all year. That also bears out in the testimony on Senate Bill 1548 in committee. By the time this bill is implemented, which is January 1st, technically it would be, you wouldn't feel it until March, whatever it is, in 2025, Idaho and California may have already passed their bills. Washington had a bill, their session ends March 7th. Their bill is dead for now, but they come back in January. We all have the goal of passing this bill, but we're all waiting for the other to move. And so here we are. Oregon loves to make the first move. Of course, we wouldn't be the first, because Arizona and Hawaii are already on full-time standard time all year round. Sometimes they're an hour ahead, sometimes they're on the same time as us, depending on us jumping forward in daylight savings time. We still have these calculations to make. That won't change. Mexico actually moved to full-time standard time in 2022, all but the border towns that are waiting for the states to make their change. So there are many states all over working on this legislation. It has been happening. We can make it happen. We can push for it to happen and be a leader. So I want to emphasize that a lot of science bears this out, and I will save some things for the close, but I also invite you to ask me questions, even if you haven't talked to me beforehand. If something is occurring to you and you wonder about it, I will do my best to answer that question. And meanwhile, if you have ever said, follow the science, now's your opportunity. Please vote yes on 1548.
Discussion on the measure. Recognize Senator Dembrow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, first of all, sign me up for ditch the switch. I very much agree with that. But I don't think that this measure is the right way to do it, with all deference to the chief sponsor and the other sponsors. Because its big flaw is that it doesn't have a built-in trigger connecting us to our neighboring states. And without that kind of trigger, the effects of it, whether for the short term or the long term, could be incredibly disruptive. Remember that currently, for 8 months out of the 12 months of the year, we're on daylight savings time. And so what that means is that for 2/3 of the year, we will be, Portland will be an hour different from Vancouver and Southwest Washington. And all of those people there the thousands of people who live in Southwest Washington and commute to Oregon or vice versa are going to have to change their watches twice every day. We will be 2 hours away from Oregonians, those of us here in Salem or, in most of the state will be 2 hours different from Ontario and the far east part of the state. And that, I think, really has the potential to be very disruptive. I understand and sympathize with the chief sponsor's goal of setting a precedent for the other states to follow, but I'm not sure that what Oregon does is necessarily, in and of itself, going to drive those other states to take action. And we know that the bill was attempted in Washington, and it did not move out of committee. Certainly there's hope in the other states, but none of them has gotten a bill out of committee yet. We know how long this kind of thing takes. So if we pass this bill and immediately go into this year-round, at least, the odds are, at least for the next few years, we're going to have this kind of discontinuity. It would be very simple to fix this by including a trigger in here that would connect us to our neighboring states. And that really makes sense, I think, as a way to approach this, that we have a sort of, coalition of advocates. We all do it at the same time, and we all move forward at the same time. So with that, that I hope explains my opposition to this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Additional discussion? Recognize Senator Hansell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question of the carrier.
This question of the carrier. Does carrier yield?
The carrier yields.
The carrier yields.
Is there, my understanding is from your testimony, it will nothing takes effect till 2025. Is that correct?
It takes effect in 2025.
Follow up?
Additional question of the carrier. Will the carrier yield?
Carrier yields.
The carrier yields.
Is there any, what the previous speaker had talked about, triggers that if nobody else does anything in the meantime, that we pull back or it sunsets, or do we, regardless of what anybody else does, we move forward?
Our trigger is if we decide in January 2025 in our long session that we don't want to do this anymore, we can change it. Meanwhile, we will be encouraging the states around us to move in this direction. I truly believe that that is the direction that folks are going.
Thank you. To the bill. I just did a quick count. I think there are 10 counties that border Washington. 6 of them are in my district. Well over half the northern border is in my district. And I know in Umatilla County, most of it's just a parallel. We do a tremendous amount of interaction with Walla Walla. For example, my medical home is in Walla Walla. And I've received all sorts of communications that, what are we doing? I mean, it's just going to cause a whole lot of disruption. Baker would be 2 hours from Ontario based upon this, if potentially, if it could happen. I'm going to have to follow what I'm hearing from my constituents and be a no vote. Even though I would like to move in this direction, I just think the cost and the disruption potentially, there may be a better way to do it, but at least as it's now written, I'll be a no vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Additional discussion. Recognize Senator Boquist.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I wasn't going to speak to this at all, but the last two senators reminded me of the last legislative session. History, okay? In the last legislative session, we, for a whole variety of reasons, wanted to have chip plants and semiconductors. And we need economic development in Oregon. And we need to do this, and we need to do it now. I find that an interesting argument back then for national security reasons, as I do today. But what I do remember sitting on the Revenue Committee, and I hear constantly, is about Oregon's overtaxation, and we're not a good business climate, and we can't do this, and we can't do that. And we're always compared to the state of Arizona. The fine state of Arizona, colleagues. The fine state of Arizona, who has better economic development laws, faster growth, supposedly better this and supposedly better that. We hear it constantly. It's sort of like keeping up with California and Washington. And if I recall correctly, though I'm a supporter of going to daylight savings times, period, I recall correctly, I think that economic horsepower state that keeps beating us out for economic development is the state of, oh yeah, Arizona. The state of Arizona is the one beating us out. And they're on standard time. So if this is a medical science issue and it's contagious, I'm in. I'm in. Let's get Oregon contagious. Let's be like Arizona. Let's get more economic development. Let's get more people moving here, and let's get industry moving. I don't know if that happens, but I'm just pointing out it sure didn't hurt in Arizona, because we could use a lot more of those plants and a lot more of the economic development from Arizona here in the fine state of Oregon. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator. Additional discussion. Recognize Senator Gelser Blouin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I did not expect to come into this session and lay awake at night thinking about my challenging vote on what time it is. But indeed, that has occurred, and I have enjoyed reading the very compelling letters from my constituents who have very strong feelings about both standard time and daylight savings time, and general consensus, though not unanimous, around not liking changing the clock twice a year. My own brother has lobbied me on this issue for a while. You may know him from lane splitting, but he also has very strong beliefs about abuse of clocks, which is what he describes as the twice annual time change. Ultimately, I talked with my stepson this morning about the back and forth of all of these things, and one of the issues I raised to him was the issue of children going to school early in the morning when it's dark. And he pointed out we don't need a time change bill to do the right thing and change the start time of school, knowing that adolescents, the science tells us they do better if we start later in the day. So he pointed out that was not a reason to make a decision on this measure. What occurred to me is that we are different from Arizona. I love Arizona. It's a beautiful state. I hope to go there sometime within the next few weeks. But it's south. It's further south than we are. And when we go back and forth between standard time and daylight savings time, there are clear deficits to both of them. Whether it is having the sun come up very, very early in the morning, which would make me very unpopular with the parents of infants, toddlers, and preschoolers in my community, or it is having the sun come up later, which makes some of my constituents unhappy related to religious issues. The real issue is that we are geographically in a place where, as inconvenient as it is, it probably makes sense that we change our clock twice a year so that we can get to and from work safely, so that kids can get to and from school safely, so that the older folks in our community can go to events in the summer who are not able to drive at nighttime. So after a lot of wrestling and with a lot of appreciation about this measure, I am going to be a no. If it was a vote of daylight saving times versus standard time, I probably would be, let's go with the standard time. But there is a trigger on that daylight savings time bill. I do not believe that those triggers will be met. And with apologies to my brother, my no vote will once again support the abuse of clocks, which apparently is sad. So thank you, Mr. President, and I urge you all to vote your heart. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Additional discussion. Recognize Senator Bonham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Isn't it fun to have a topic that knows no partisanship? Equal love and hate for changing the clocks. Which time to choose? I'm looking at this, this compelling graph of the sun going up and down. I know one thing about our farmers. Our farmers are going to go to work when the sun's up. They don't care if it's 4 or 5. But our kids in the wintertime do need to get to school safely. And I happen to live right on the corner across the street from an elementary school. I watch how many students still walk to school. And the thought of them walking to school in darkness and cold, it does bother me. And I remember wanting to support, and I believe I did. I think I voted yes for the coalition where we said, hey, if everybody moves to daylight savings, I will too. And back then, people started making the argument, oh no, standard time is the better time. I also have a brother that has weighed in on this. He's not a constituent, though, so he's going to have to go talk to Senator Boquist about his opinion. This is interesting, that we're here today talking about whether or not we like it light at night or light in the morning, simultaneously making the decision. I reams of compelling arguments from health professionals and other mental health professionals as to what changing the clock does to us in terms of productivity, in terms of mental health, physical health. I think there's very good reasons that we would choose one time and stick with it. The fact that we can do this on our own, Oregon flies on our own wings, not Arizona's wings, but at the same time, Arizona did it for their reasons, one of which is that it gets extremely hot in the summertime, and they thought that they could curb late night use of air conditioning. We have the same concern east of the Cascades. We get very hot summer nights. And so I think as difficult as a decision as this is, right across the border from Washington, I share Senator Hansell's concerns that we do have businesses that do business on both sides of the Columbia River. Having different times will be inconvenient, but Arizona does this. They do it currently. Hawaii does it too, but I don't think they have that interstate concern that we have. So ultimately, all that said, where am I going to land? I'm going to land on a yes, I think, today, but I think I will agree with the good senator from the heart of the valley. Vote your conscience, obviously. Yeah, vote your district. I don't think that there's a good or a bad vote here, but we are here and we must vote, so I will vote yes.
Additional discussion. Recognize Senator Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I was one of the people who was here when we voted on that permanent daylight savings time plan. And despite the fact that as a physician, I feel extraordinarily strongly that switching the clocks, or as the senator from the Heart of Valley's brother says, abuse of clocks, is a bad idea, which is clearly true for health reasons. I voted no, partly because I really believe that standard time is healthier for people, and partly because, as a member of the Jewish community, where people are not allowed to say morning prayers until after the sun has risen, if we were on, it's late enough already in the winter on standard time. If we were to be on daylight time year-round, it would be almost impossible for people to participate in congregational morning prayers and still get to work at a reasonable hour. So, I want to make a couple of points as one of the chief sponsors of this bill. You have heard a lot about the health. I'm going to emphasize that. The facts that are on these 2 pages on your desk are very accurate. We have an obesity epidemic in this country. There are a lot of reasons for it. Daylight savings time is one of them. It is bad for our circadian rhythms, and we don't metabolize things as well when we're switching clocks and when our time clock is not aligned with the sun. It is bad for mental health. It increases risk of depression. It is bad for heart disease. We see a significant exacerbation in heart attacks, increase in heart attacks around the time switches, And speaking of Arizona, for proportional populations, their heart attack rate's a little bit lower, relatively speaking. I hear the concerns about switching and the challenges of the borders that we face. I would comment, though, that I had the privilege of being out in Malheur and Baker counties in the Good Senator District's 30s district earlier this year, toward the end of October. And I landed in Boise. I drove to Ontario. That was in the same time zone. And then I drove to Unity, Oregon, which is in Baker County, and all of a sudden it was an hour earlier. And I asked my host, former Baker County Commissioner, how do you make this work? And he said, you just have to kind of know where you are. And I would point out, colleagues, that we have a lot of businesses, and in this day and age of remote work, many of us on an ongoing basis are constantly dealing with businesses and other people in time zones that are not the same as ours. We know how to do this. People are capable of doing this. And yes, I get that crossing the Columbia River and just having the change is a little odd. But you know what? People will adapt. And the last thing I would say, colleagues, is this. This is a big game of chicken, right? Nobody wants to be the first state to do this. And I get that having Oregon be the state in the middle between Washington and California, be the one to do this first, is going to be a little odd, and it's going to be a little awkward. But once we've done it, and we've demonstrated the benefits, and we've demonstrated our commitment to this, I think we'll see Washington and California and a lot of other states picking up the mantle sooner. Oregon has a remarkable history of emphasizing the health of Oregonians, from passing the Oregon Health Plan over 30 years ago to all the advances we've made today. Colleagues, let's take a stand for public health. Let's take a stand for the health of Oregonians. Let's take a stand for religious freedom. And let's take a stand for Oregon doing the right thing always. Vote yes.
Seeing no additional discussion in the queue, Senator Thatcher, do you wish to close?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for being a co-chief sponsor, by the way. I heard mentioned earlier, well, let's see, from the senator from Northeast and Southeast Portland, a concern that there was not a trigger in place. And I just want to say that each of us, each of the coalition that I'm talking about in these different states, emphasized they did not want to do a trigger. That is not where they wanted to go. They wanted to go at their own pace, knowing that, you know, however the pickup sticks landed, that was the way it was going to land. And right now, we are stepping out in front of this issue, and it will be possibly, if Washington still has a chance in January. There's nothing that says Idaho is not moving ahead. They have they have a different numbering system. It's H584, and it is in process right now. And there's nothing that says that Washington won't catch up with us. There's nothing that says that California's Senate Bill 1413 or Assembly Bill 1776, love that number, won't get some movement. Now, I'll grant you, California is a different planet, and they will take a bit longer. They have a different kind of legislature and a different process. But in the meantime, and Washington also had a very, very, very short session this year. So it does create this game of chicken, I like that term. But I believe that it is a temporary situation. We might have a weird situation next summer, but after that, I think things will start changing. You'll start seeing them change around the United States. Now, once again, 3/4 of the testimony was in favor of the bill, and we can ditch the switch for real this time. How many people have said to you, didn't we take care of that a few years ago? Are we still doing that? What happened? I know I'm getting that, but guess what? We can take care of it this year. We can take care of it and pass legislation which is within the realm and I guess, permission of the federal government to do so and make that decision. It is the healthy choice, it is the right choice, it is the most sustainable choice. In fact, in 1974, during the energy crunch, President Nixon signed into law a change to semi-permanent daylight saving time. It was supposed to be in place for 2 years. It did not yield any energy savings, or it was negligible. And instead, it was repealed after 6 months because people did not accept it. The most lasting acceptance of a time to observe is standard time. It's the one we've been basically following for eons of time since people have been on Earth. It has been, as diurnal beings, that is what we've been following. So am I forgetting anything here? Okay, I do want to point out the handouts on your desk. Well, actually, there's just one. I have them on one page. Just take a glance at that. Yes, we are in the Northern Hemisphere, and we have longer summers, shorter winters, and look at the one that has the state of Oregon on it, and it tells you, and you might have to flip it back over from the sunrise, sunset one, but it says permanent standard time, natural time preserves morning light, and the upper part of this handout shows you the time of the latest sunrises. And then on the bottom it says, it shows you what permanent daylight saving would look like, and it makes the sunrise too late, and it shows you the number of days with post 8 a.m. sunrises, and there's quite a few, especially in Eastern Oregon, it'd be 160. Standard time makes more sense. This is our time to make a move, and I still think it's going to be, if we don't get Washington this time, and if we don't get Idaho this time, it will be quirky at best, annoying at worst, but I really believe it'll be temporary. And with that, I hope you'll join me in supporting Senate Bill 1548.
The question now rises upon the third reading and final passage of Senate Bill 1548. Those who are of the opinion the bill should be passed will answer aye as their names are called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will please call the roll.
Taylor. Thatcher. Weber. Woods. Anderson. Bonham. Boquist. Campos. Dembrow. Finley. Frederick. Gelser Blouin. Gerard. Golden. Gorsuch. Hansell. Hayden. Jama. Knope. Lieber. Linthicum. Manning. Meek. Patterson. Przonski. Robinson. Brock Smith. Solman. Steiner. Gerard. Hayden. President Wagner.
Aye. Recognize Senator Thatcher.
Point of order. I have a question.
State your point.
I had a script in my pocket in case it did fail, but But it says, having voted on the prevailing side, I serve notice of possible reconsideration. So I ask you, what is the motion now? Okay. All right. So then I guess I understand now that I will request a unanimous, well, I guess I just want to change my vote to no. There you go. And then serve notice of possible reconsideration, having voted on the prevailing side with a no. Does that work, Mr. President?
Yeah. Senator Thatcher, and how do you vote?
Okay, I vote no.
Okay. Senator Thatcher, to repeat, having voted on the prevailing side, serves notice of possible reconsideration on Senate Bill 1548.
Voting nay, Campos, Dembrow, Frederick, Gelser Blouin, Golden, Gorsuch, Hansell, Hayden, Jama, Knope, Lieber, Manning, Przonski, Taylor, Thatcher, Woods, 14 ayes.
Senate Bill 1548, having failed to receive a constitutional majority, is declared failed. And recognize Senator Thatcher for filing your notice of possible reconsideration.
Having voted on the prevailing side, I serve notice of possible reconsideration of Senate Bill 1548. Thank you.
Senator Thatcher, having voted on the prevailing side, serves notice of possible reconsideration on Senate Bill 1548. Other business of the Senate. Recognize Senator Thatcher.
Mr. President, having served notice of reconsideration on Senate Bill 1548, I move that the vote whereby the Senate failed to pass 1548 be reconsidered.
Senator Thatcher, having served notice of reconsideration, moves that the vote whereby the Senate failed to pass Senate Bill 1548 be reconsidered. Senator Thatcher, to your motion.
Thank you. The point of this reconsideration, and it must pass in order for this next vote to occur, which is to send it back to the Rules Committee to amend it, to install a trigger, amend it with a trigger, which I believe will make many of you feel more comfortable. And so that is the purpose of this motion to reconsideration, the bill.
Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, recognize Senator Lieber.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is true, and as the chair of the Rules Committee, I am willing to have that bill sent back to me. Thank you.
Is there additional discussion? Seeing no discussion, the question now before the chamber is the reconsideration of the vote on Senate Bill 1548. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye as their name is called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will please call the roll.
Weber, Woods, Anderson, Bonham, Boquist, Campos, Dembrow, Finley, Frederick, Gelser Blouin, Gerard, Golden, Gorsuch, Hansell, Hayden, Jama, Knope, Lieber, Linthicum, Manning, Meek, Patterson, Przonski, Robinson, Brock Smith, Solman, Steiner, Taylor, Thatcher, Gerard, Hayden, President Wagner.
Aye.
Excused, Girard. Voting nay, Campos, Taylor, Woods, 26 ayes.
The motion is carried. The bill is now before us under third reading and final passage. The clerk will please read the bill.
Senate Bill 1548 relating to standards of time.
Recognize Senator Thatcher.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 1548 be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Senator Thatcher moves that Senate Bill 1548 be referred to the Committee on Rules. Senator Thatcher, to your motion.
The purpose of moving it to the Committee on Rules is to add the trigger that would make much more sense for some people and then bring it back to hopefully a third reading soon. Thank you.
Discussion on the motion. Seeing no discussion, Senator Thatcher, you wish to close? She does not. The question now rises upon the referral of Senate Bill 1548 to the Committee on Rules. Those in favor will answer aye as their names are called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will please call the roll.
Woods. Anderson. Bonham. Boquist. Campos. Dembrow. Finley. Frederick. Gelser Blouin. Girard. Golden. Gorsuch. Hansell. Hayden. Jama. Knope. Lieber. Linthicum. Manning. Meek. Patterson. Przonski. Robinson. Brock Smith. Solman. Steiner. Taylor. Thatcher. Weber. Bonham. President Wagner.
Aye.
Voting nay, Campos, Taylor, 28 ayes.
The measure is referred to the Senate Rules Committee, having achieved the sufficient majority.